What really happened in those final days before Carlos Marin's sudden passing? How did his Il Divo brothers react when they realized their journey together would never be the same? Today, we're diving deep into the untold story of Carlos's final chapter, a story filled with courage, heartbreak, and an emotional farewell that left fans around the world in tears. Stay with us until the end, because what we uncover will change the way you see Il Divo forever. Carlos Marín, the Spanish baritone whose powerful voice defined Il Divo's sound, had always been known for his incredible energy on stage. He was larger than life, full of charisma and the heartbeat of the group. But behind the spotlight, Carlos was quietly facing health struggles that few knew about. In December 2021, fans were shocked when news broke that he had been hospitalized in Manchester, England, after falling gravely ill during their tour. At first, many hoped it was just a temporary setback. Carlos had always been strong, resilient, and unstoppable, so the idea that something more serious was happening felt unthinkable. But as the days went on, the reality became more difficult to ignore. His Il Divo brothers, David Miller, Urs Bueller, and Sebastian Isambard, were devastated as updates grew darker. In those final days, Carlos remained a fighter. Reports from those close to him describe a man who, even in his weakest moments, never lost his smile, his warmth, or his love for music. He still thought about his fans. He still thought about the future of Il Divo. And even though his body was failing, his spirit never gave up. When the heartbreaking news of his passing was announced on December 19, 2021, the world of music stood still. Fans across the globe mourned, lighting candles, sharing memories, and flooding social media with tributes. For millions, it felt like losing a family member. But for Il Divo, it was like losing a brother. Their goodbye was not just a private farewell, but a promise to honor Carlos in every note they would ever sing again. In interviews and on stage, David, Urs, and Sebastian have shared how difficult those moments were. The shock of losing him so suddenly, the emptiness of walking on stage without his voice by their side. Many times, they confessed they didn't know if they could continue, but they also knew Carlos would have wanted them to. And so, their heartbreaking goodbye turned into a legacy. Il Divo began dedicating their performances to Carlos, carrying his memory with them as they sang. His voice may be gone from the stage, but his presence lingers in every harmony, in every lyric, and in every tear that fans shed when his name is spoken. This story isn't just about the tragedy of loss. It's about love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond of four men who became brothers. It's about a goodbye that will echo forever, reminding us that while Carlos Marín may no longer be here in person, his music and his spirit will live on eternally. After Carlos's passing, Il Divo faced a crossroads that no artist ever wants to face. For nearly 2 decades, they had performed together as four voices in perfect harmony. The thought of stepping onto a stage without Carlos was unimaginable. In those first weeks, silence filled the places where laughter, rehearsals, and shared dreams once lived. The group canceled shows and fans around the world waited, wondering if this was the end of Il Divo altogether. Behind closed doors, David, Urs, and Sebastian wrestled with their grief. Each one admitted that continuing without Carlos felt impossible. The pain was raw, and the bond between them was shattered by the loss of their brother. But it was in their darkest moment that they remembered something Carlos had always said: "The show must go on, because music is bigger than us." Those words became their lifeline. Slowly, they began to realize that the greatest way to honor Carlos's memory was not to stop singing, but to keep going, for him, for themselves, and for the millions of fans who loved him. Returning to the stage wasn't just about music anymore. It was about carrying Carlos's spirit with him and making sure his voice would never truly be silenced. When Il Divo announced their first tribute concerts in honor of Carlos, the reaction from fans was overwhelming. Tickets sold quickly, not just because people wanted to hear the music, but because they wanted to grieve together, to celebrate Carlos's life, and to show their support for the remaining trio. The concerts became more than performances. They became healing gatherings where music, tears, and memories blended into something unforgettable. On stage, David, Urs, and Sebastian often left an empty spotlight shining in Carlos's honor, a powerful symbol that his presence was still with them. Fans wept as video montages of Carlos played in the background, and the group's voices carried a raw emotion that had never been heard before. Each note was a tribute. Each song was a goodbye. And yet, it was also a promise that Carlos's legacy would live on. What many didn't realize was how difficult these performances were for the trio. Each night meant reliving their loss, facing the empty space where Carlos once stood, and fighting back emotions while trying to give fans the show they deserved. But through those tears, something incredible happened. The fans gave back. Their applause, their chants of Carlos's name, their unwavering support reminded the group that they were not alone. Il Divo's bond with their fans became stronger than ever. In a way, the fans carried Carlos too. Together, the audience and the performers became one, united in grief, but also in love. And it was in those moments that Il Divo realized they could keep going, not just for themselves, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by Carlos's voice. Their journey after loss wasn't about replacing him, it was about honoring him. Every concert became a living memory, and every harmony carried a piece of Carlos's soul. The world had lost a legend, but his brothers ensured that his light would never fade. But how did Il Divo manage to balance their grief with the pressure of continuing their career? And what steps did they take to protect their legacy while honoring Carlos's memory? 4 months after Carlos's passing, Il Divo's identity as a group was in question. For nearly 18 years, their image had been inseparable from the 4 voices that created their iconic sound. Without Carlos, they weren't just missing a singer. They were missing their anchor, their brother, and the man whose baritone gave their harmonies so much power. Many wondered, could Il Divo even exist as a trio? Behind the scenes, David, Urs, and Sebastian struggled with this same question. The weight of expectation was crushing. Fans wanted to hear them sing again, but the group knew the risk of moving forward. If they returned too soon, it might look like they were replacing Carlos. If they stayed silent for too long, they risked fading away altogether. It was a fragile balancing act, and every decision they made felt like walking on glass. In interviews, the trio admitted that they wrestled with grief privately while trying to stay strong publicly. They had to learn not only how to sing without Carlos's voice, but how to stand on stage without his presence. There were times when rehearsals came to a halt because emotions overwhelmed them. Urs once described the silence after singing a phrase where Carlos's voice should have been as a haunting reminder that will never be the same. And yet, it was in those fragile moments that Il Divo began to redefine themselves, not by erasing Carlos, but by carrying him forward in everything they did. Instead of avoiding his memory, they chose to highlight it. At concerts, they often projected Carlos's image on the big screen, blending his recordings with their live voices. The effect was overwhelming. Fans heard his baritone woven into their harmonies, as if he were still singing alongside them. It wasn't just a performance, it was a resurrection of memory, a way of saying, Carlos is still here. At the same time, the group began embracing a more personal side of their artistry. Without Carlos's magnetic energy on stage, David, Urs, and Sebastian stepped into new roles. They spoke more openly to audiences, shared more heartfelt stories, and let their vulnerability show. Fans who attended these performances often said they had never felt closer to Il Divo than during this time. It was a transformation, not a replacement. They weren't trying to become something new, they were learning how to continue as a living tribute. And in doing so, they created a deeper bond with their audience, one rooted in shared grief, healing, and love. Still, challenges remained. Critics questioned whether Il Divo should continue at all, and some feared the group would never recover. But the fans, loyal and passionate, reminded everyone why Il Divo mattered. Their support, their applause, and their unwavering devotion gave the trio strength to keep singing. And through that strength, Il Divo began shaping a new chapter. They weren't just a band anymore. They were guardians of a legacy. Every performance became a reminder that Carlos Marín's voice may be gone from this world, but it will never be forgotten. But this transformation wasn't without controversy. Some fans embraced the trio's decision to continue, while others struggled to accept it. The debate over Il Divo's future was fierce, emotional, and deeply personal. The moment Il Divo announced that they would continue performing without Carlos Marín, the reaction from fans was immediate and divided. For many, it was a bittersweet relief. After months of mourning, hearing that the trio would honor Carlos by keeping the music alive felt like a healing balm. These fans flooded social media with messages of encouragement, sharing stories of how Il Divo's music had carried them through their own losses. They wrote things like, "Carlos would want this. He would never want the music to stop." But for others, the decision was almost unbearable. Carlos wasn't just one of the four voices. He was, in their eyes, irreplaceable. Some argued that Il Divo without Carlos wasn't Il Divo at all, but something else entirely. On fan forums, heated debates erupted. Should the group keep going, or should the curtain have closed the day Carlos passed away? Emotions ran high, and the heartbreak was evident. At concerts, this division could be felt in the audience. There were moments when the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, celebrating the courage of David, Urs, and Sebastian. Yet, there were also fans who wept silently, not because of the music itself, but because every note reminded them of the empty space where Carlos's voice once lived. For many, it was like watching a family continue after losing a loved one. You're grateful they're carrying on, but the absence is a wound that never fully heals. Il Divo themselves acknowledged this pain. They spoke openly during shows, telling fans, "We know this isn't easy. It isn't easy for us either, but Carlos's spirit is here with us in every song we sing." And then, in the most emotional moments, they would let Carlos's recorded voice blend with theirs, creating a haunting harmony that brought entire arenas to tears. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a living memorial. Still, some fans questioned the trio's motives. Rumors swirled. Were they continuing because of passion, or was it for the business side of things? Could Il Divo truly survive as a trio without diluting their legacy? These questions created a cloud of doubt, but one thing was undeniable. People were still watching, still listening, and still deeply invested. And through this storm of emotions, support, criticism, grief, and love, Il Divo began to prove that they weren't trying to replace Carlos. Instead, they were carrying his torch. They weren't just surviving, they were evolving. And the fan base, no matter how divided, remained bound together by one unshakable truth: the music of Il Divo still mattered. But what no one expected was how this loss and the decision to continue would completely reshape Il Divo's concerts, turning them from elegant showcases into deeply emotional experiences that felt almost spiritual. When Il Divo finally returned to the stage without Carlos Marín, it wasn't just another concert. It was an event drenched in emotion, almost like a memorial wrapped inside a performance. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and instead of the usual powerful opening, there was silence. On a giant screen behind the stage, images of Carlos appeared, smiling, singing, laughing. Some fans instantly broke down in tears. Others clasped their hands together, whispering prayers as if they were about to attend a farewell they never wanted to face. And then the music began. David, Urs, and Sebastian walked out slowly, dressed in dark, elegant suits that seemed to symbolize both mourning and resilience. The first notes of the opening song rang through the arena, and as their voices blended, something unexpected happened. Carlos's voice joined in. A recording of him was woven seamlessly into the arrangement, creating a chilling harmony that made the entire audience gasp. It wasn't just a performance. It felt like Carlos was there, standing with them. Fans later described these concerts as unlike anything Il Divo had ever done before. The shows became more intimate, more raw, and more emotional. Instead of simply showcasing their extraordinary vocal talent, the concerts turned into a living tribute, a conversation between the past and the present. At times, the trio would step back, allowing Carlos's pre-recorded solos to play over the speakers, while a spotlight illuminated his empty place on stage. The effect was powerful. It made people cry, but also smile through their tears, remembering the man whose presence could never be replaced. One of the most emotional moments came when they performed "Time to Say Goodbye." As they reached the chorus, fans stood up from their seats, many holding candles or the lights from their phones, creating a sea of flickering stars in the darkness. The voices of David, Urs, and Sebastian soared, and when Carlos's voice entered from the recording, the crowd erupted into sobs and applause at the same time. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a collective goodbye, a way of saying, "We miss you, but you'll always be with us." And then, between songs, the trio spoke from the heart. They didn't hide their grief. Urs admitted that stepping on stage without Carlos felt like walking with only 3 legs when you've always had 4. David reminded fans that Carlos loved nothing more than performing, and continuing the music was their way of keeping his dream alive. Sebastian, often the most emotional, thanked the audience for being their strength during the hardest chapter of their lives. Their words didn't feel scripted. They felt like conversations between family, shared with thousands of strangers who loved Carlos just as much as they did. But it wasn't all sadness. There were moments of joy too. Moments where the audience clapped along, cheered, and even laughed when old video clips of Carlos's playful personality appeared on the screen. It was as if the concerts had become a roller coaster of emotions, one minute heartbreaking, the next uplifting. And this blend of grief and celebration made the experience unforgettable. Fans who attended these concerts said they felt transformed. They didn't leave with just memories of music. They left with the sense that they had been part of a sacred farewell, a collective act of healing. For many, it was proof that Il Divo's bond with Carlos hadn't ended with his passing. It was alive in every note, every lyric, every tear shed in the crowd. But behind these breathtaking performances, there was also a question that weighed heavily. How long could Il Divo continue carrying on like this? Would the emotional intensity of blending Carlos's presence into their shows be sustainable, or was this only a temporary chapter before they reinvented themselves entirely? Away from the spotlight, things weren't as polished as what fans saw on stage. While the concerts were filled with grace and emotion, the reality behind the curtain was much harder. David, Urs, and Sebastian were not just losing a bandmate, they were losing a brother. For almost 2 decades, Carlos had been their anchor, the one who brought laughter during rehearsals, the one who pushed them to take risks, the one who made even the toughest tours bearable. Without him, rehearsals felt empty, backstage felt quiet, and even the simplest things, like hearing only 3 voices harmonize instead of 4, felt like a painful reminder of their loss. The trio admitted in interviews that they questioned whether they could go on at all. Urs was the most hesitant, often wondering if it was better to close the chapter of Il Divo permanently rather than try to carry it forward without Carlos. Sebastian, who wears his heart on his sleeve, struggled with deep guilt, saying it sometimes felt wrong to stand on stage without his friend beside him. And David, always the pragmatist, reminded them that Carlos himself would have insisted they keep performing. After all, for Carlos, music was life, and stopping would have been the opposite of honoring him. But even with this determination, challenges loomed. Contracts had to be reconsidered, set lists restructured, and performances reimagined. Songs that were once Carlos's signature had to either be reworked or left out, and that decision alone brought tears to the group. Imagine trying to sing a song where one voice is missing, knowing the audience can feel it too. It was both emotionally draining and technically difficult. Then came the fans. While Il Divo might have been unsure, their supporters left no room for doubt. Messages poured in from around the world, urging the trio to keep going. Fans told them that Carlos's spirit lived on through their music, that stopping would feel like letting his voice disappear forever. Some even shared how Il Divo's concerts after Carlos's passing had helped them process their own personal griefs, turning the group into more than just performers, but companions in healing. And so, little by little, David, Urs, and Sebastian began to rebuild. They didn't try to replace Carlos because they knew that was impossible. Instead, they chose to embrace the loss openly, letting it shape a new identity for the group. Their shows became a blend of past and present, part tribute, part renewal, and while it wasn't easy, it gave them strength. Behind closed doors, though, the pain still lingered. Every sound check, every empty dressing room, every hotel stay on tour brought back memories of Carlos. But what kept them going was the belief that their journey wasn't over. They owed it to themselves, to their fans, and most of all, to Carlos. And yet, as strong as they tried to be, there was a lingering question. Could Il Divo ever feel whole again, or would they forever be defined by the loss of their fourth member? That question would come into sharper focus when discussions began about the future of the group itself, whether to remain a trio, invite guest singers, or reshape Il Divo entirely. When the curtain fell after those first tribute concerts, the question that haunted the trio was no longer just, can we go on? It became, how do we go on? For a group that had built its identity on the perfect harmony of four voices, the loss of Carlos wasn't just emotional, it struck at the very core of what Il Divo was. Behind closed doors, the conversations grew heavy. Urs, always thoughtful and deeply introspective, believed that keeping the group as a trio was the most respectful way forward. Carlos is irreplaceable, he reportedly said during one private discussion. Bringing someone new in would feel like erasing him. For Urs, preserving Il Divo meant preserving Carlos's memory exactly as it was. Sebastian, however, worried that performing as three would always feel incomplete, both to them and to the fans. His heart leaned toward finding a way to fill the gap, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. He argued that Carlos himself, full of energy and passion, would never have wanted the music to stop because of him. Sebastian feared that without some form of renewal, the group might wither under the weight of its grief. David, ever pragmatic, found himself caught between the two perspectives. He knew Urs was right. No one could ever replace Carlos. But he also understood Sebastian's point. Music, especially Il Divo's music, was built on balance, on the richness of four distinct voices blending as one. If we stay as three, he reasoned, we'll always feel like something's missing. But if we bring someone new, it risks changing everything that Il Divo stands for. And it wasn't just their own emotions shaping these conversations. Management, record labels, and even international promoters began pressing them for answers. Fans across the world were demanding clarity. Would Il Divo continue? Would they tour again? Would there be a new member? For every fan who pleaded with them to remain a trio, another begged for them to introduce a fourth voice to keep the sound alive. The pressure was immense. Even more difficult was the symbolic weight of the decision. Il Divo wasn't just any group. It was a brotherhood, one formed by Simon Cowell's vision, but strengthened by nearly 2 decades of shared dreams, struggles, and triumphs. To move forward without Carlos was already painful. To consider inviting someone new into that sacred circle was almost unthinkable. Late-night talks stretched for hours. Tears were shed. Voices were raised. And always, the same question returned: what would Carlos want? The trio replayed his words in their minds, remembering his passion for life, his drive to perform, his belief that Il Divo was bigger than any one person. Slowly, a new realization began to form, not about replacing Carlos, but about finding a way to carry his legacy into the future. But the path they eventually chose would not come without risk. Fans might not accept it, critics might attack it, and even the trio themselves weren't sure if they were ready for the consequences of their decision. When the time finally came for Il Divo to break their silence, the world was watching. After months of speculation, whispers in the press, and endless questions from fans, David, Urs, and Sebastian stood together on stage during a special press event that was streamed live worldwide. Their faces carried the weight of everything they had been through: grief, exhaustion, and the enormous pressure of deciding the future of Il Divo. The announcement began with what fans expected: a heartfelt tribute to Carlos Marín. They spoke of his laughter, his passion, and the fire he brought into every room. Urz's voice cracked as he said, "Carlos will always be a part of Il Divo. Nothing can change that." The room was silent, many already holding back tears. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. David took a deep breath and explained that Il Divo would continue, not as an attempt to replace Carlos, but as a way to honor him. They revealed that while they would remain a trio for certain projects, they had also chosen to introduce guest performers into some concerts and recordings. This way, Carlos's voice and memory would remain central, but the music could still grow and evolve. The reactions were immediate and mixed. In the room, applause rang out. Some fans cheered, relieved that Il Divo would continue. Online, thousands of comments flooded social media within minutes. Many praised the decision as the perfect balance between respect and renewal. One fan wrote, "Carlos would want this. He would never want the music to die with him." But not everyone agreed. Some longtime followers felt it was too soon, accusing the group of moving on too quickly. Others argued that bringing in new voices, even temporarily, risked destroying the magic that had made Il Divo unique. "Il Divo without Carlos is not Il Divo," one critic wrote, echoing a sentiment shared by many. The media quickly jumped on the story. Headlines blared with words like Il Divo's bold new direction and a risky step forward without Carlos. Interviews with industry insiders painted the move as both brave and dangerous. Some praised the group for finding a way to survive in the face of tragedy, while others doubted whether fans would embrace this new chapter. Through it all, David, Urs, and Sebastian stayed firm. They repeated one message again and again: this is not about replacing Carlos. This is about keeping his spirit alive through music. For them, it was never a question of moving on. It was about moving forward, carrying Carlos with them every step of the way. And as the first new concerts under this decision began, it became clear that no matter how fans felt about the change, one truth remained: the emotions, the memories, and the legacy of Il Divo would never fade. But the journey was far from over. The choice they made would soon lead to an even greater challenge. Could they live up to the expectations they had set, and would the fans' love be enough to sustain them through this transformation? The true test of Il Divo's decision came not at the press event, but when the lights dimmed, the curtains rose, and the trio walked onto the stage for their first concert under this new chapter. For months, speculation had dominated headlines and fan forums, but nothing could prepare anyone for the emotions of that night. The concert opened with a video montage of Carlos, smiling during rehearsals, belting out his signature notes, and laughing with his bandmates behind the scenes. His voice filled the arena as the crowd erupted in applause, tears streaming down countless faces. Fans held banners with messages like "Carlos forever in our hearts" and "Il Divo is for always." From the very first moment, it was clear this was not just a performance, it was a communion of grief, love, and healing. As David, Urs, and Sebastian stepped forward, the applause lasted minutes. They stood in silence, visibly moved, before finally beginning their first song. The harmonies were beautiful, but undeniably different. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the familiar depth of Carlos's voice was missing. Some fans closed their eyes, trying to imagine him there, while others clung tightly to the fact that his image was projected behind them, as if his presence still guided the group. For the trio, the experience was overwhelming. Urs later admitted that stepping on stage without Carlos felt like trying to breathe with one lung. Sebastian confessed he had to fight back tears during nearly every song, often turning his face slightly so the audience wouldn't see. David, ever the steady one, carried the weight of holding the group together, reminding himself with every lyric that they were singing for Carlos, not just without him. The emotional climax came midway through the concert when they performed Hallelujah. As the final chorus approached, A recording of Carlos's voice was layered into the arrangement. The effect was breathtaking. The audience gasped, then rose to their feet in unison, clapping, crying, and singing along. Many later described it as if heaven itself had opened and Carlos was singing down to them. For a brief, hauntingly beautiful moment, Il Divo felt whole again. But while the audience found comfort, the trio found the experience bittersweet. Behind the curtain, when the applause roared, they admitted the silence in Carlos's dressing room was unbearable. No one was there to crack jokes. No one was there to break the tension with his larger-than-life humor. The burden of carrying the group forward weighed heavily on them, and after each show, they often collapsed into each other's arms in tears, reminding themselves that they were still a family, even if a piece was missing. Yet, night after night, something remarkable happened. Fans didn't just come to the concerts. They came to mourn, to celebrate, and to heal. In a way, Il Divo's performances became more than shows. They became ceremonies of remembrance. Audiences left not only entertained, but transformed, carrying Carlos's memory with them in a way that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Still, not everything was smooth. Critics wrote mixed reviews. Some praised the trio's courage, calling the concerts a powerful tribute to a fallen brother. Others said the absence of Carlos made the sound hollow, that Il Divo without him would never truly be the same. The trio knew this, and they felt it too, but they pressed on. Because for them, every stage, every note, every tear shed by the audience was proof that Carlos's spirit had not died. The concerts proved one thing: Il Divo's story wasn't over. It was different, yes, painfully different, but the music still carried a heartbeat. And in those moments when Carlos's voice joined theirs from recordings, or when the crowd sang in his honor, it was as though the four were reunited once again, just in a different way. But with every performance, a new question began to rise, not just among the fans, but within the trio themselves. Could Il Divo truly survive long-term in this form, or was this tribute chapter only temporary? When Il Divo finally stepped onto the stage after announcing their future without Carlos, the energy in the room was unlike anything they had ever experienced. It wasn't the usual excitement of a world tour or the glamour of a red carpet concert. It was heavier, more emotional, like everyone present had gathered to witness both a tribute and a rebirth. The lights dimmed, and for a few moments, there was nothing but silence. Then, the screen behind them lit up with images of Carlos, his most iconic performances, his infectious laughter, his signature charm that had captivated millions. As his voice filled the arena, singing one of his beloved solos, the audience erupted in applause, cheers, and sobs. Fans clutched each other, some lifting banners with messages like "Forever 4" and "Carlos lives on" through the music. It felt less like a concert and more like a global family gathering, united by grief and love. When David, Urs, and Sebastian finally began to sing, their voices were strong, but every note carried the weight of loss. The missing fourth harmony was painfully obvious, but instead of trying to cover it, they leaned into it, creating space for Carlos's memory to live within the music. Fans could sense their vulnerability. These were not just world-class performers tonight, but three men carrying the burden of continuing a dream without the brother who helped build it. Midway through the concert came one of the most unforgettable moments. During Hallelujah, a track that had always been a favorite among fans, the arrangement shifted into something magical. As the trio sang, Carlos's pre-recorded voice suddenly rose in the background, joining them in harmony. The crowd gasped, then stood as one, tears streaming, phones raised with lights glowing like stars in the darkened arena. It was as though Carlos himself had descended to sing with them one last time. For a few sacred minutes, Il Divo was four again. But behind the scenes, the struggle was far from over. Urs later admitted that he nearly broke down mid-performance, turning his back to the crowd to compose himself. Sebastian described the emptiness of looking to his side and not seeing Carlos's animated gestures, his energy, his constant encouragement. David confessed that while the applause gave them strength, walking into Carlos's empty dressing room after the show was the hardest part of all. Still, the concerts proved something vital. Il Divo was not just about four men singing together. It was about a bond with millions of fans around the world who had grown with them, grieved with them, and now stood with them in their darkest hour. Audiences didn't come only for the music. They came to heal, to pay tribute, and to ensure Carlos's legacy lived on. Reviews of these performances were mixed, but powerful. Some critics hailed them as a moving tribute, full of soul and sincerity, while others noted the undeniable emptiness of the missing fourth voice. But for the fans, those technicalities didn't matter. What mattered was that Il Divo was still here, still singing, still carrying Carlos in every note. The truth was clear. These concerts were no longer just shows. They had become sacred spaces, part performance, part memorial, part celebration of life. And for the trio, though the grief remained heavy, each night on stage was a reminder that Carlos's spirit was not gone. It was there, woven into the harmonies, shining in the faces of fans, and echoing in the applause that followed every song. But even as the tribute tour continued, a new question lingered in the air. Could Il Divo truly build a future without Carlos? Or was this only a temporary chapter before the final curtain call?